Welcome back, everyone. I'm the BuW Gamer, and today we are getting into another organization-based archetype series, and that's going to be the Knights of Lastwall. We've kind of gone a little bit out of order as far as the alphabet is concerned, and that's just because I wanted to do the Lastwall Sentry first before I did the Knight Reclaimant and the Knight Vigilant. So, that being the case, today we're going to be essentially looking at the core archetype of the Knights of Lastwall. Now, the Knights of Lastwall, just to give you a brief overview, they are a set of knights who, at one point in time, watched over this large crypt where the Whispering Tyrant was held captive. It's called the Gallows Spire, and when he got free, the kingdom that was, watching over him pretty much was utterly destroyed, run over by undead, and the prior knight captain left for Absalom to go get aid, while the remains joined together under a few key knights who are really cool. Excuse me. And formed the Knights of Lastwall, which pretty much go around and just fight undead. This archetype is all about being the ultimate knight who fights undead. They get a lot of shield-based feats, a lot of defensive-based feats, and a lot of anti-dead-based feats. So let's go ahead and look at the dedication itself. Now, it is an uncommon dedication. Most of the organization-based ones are, so that's not something I would worry about. The biggest things that you need to know is that you need to be a member of the Knights of Lastwall, and you need access to the shield block feat, which is easy to get. There's a lot of classes just start with shield block, but you can also pick it up as a general feat as early as level 3, or if you're a human, as early as level 1. So if you're using this with 3 archetype, which is something I recommend everyone does, it's really easy to get into, honestly. Now, access is, again, something that is only specifically for Pathfinder Society, though when I use it as a GM, I just make it where you can only be from one region. So, it has that kind of limiting factor, but in all honesty, it's not a balanced feature of the game. It's just kind of like a more lore implied thing. Regardless, if you're not in Pathfinder Society, access isn't going to be relevant to you. So, that being the case, what the actual dedication does is pretty good. You become trained in athletics and undead lore. I always love a good lore skill, and this is a great way to get one. Now, if you're already trained in either of these, you become an expert instead, which is a really easy way to get expert proficiency in athletics pretty early in the game, which makes it very, very solid. And you also gain the reactive shield fighter feat, which if you watched my recent class build where I talked about the kineticist, the reactive shield actually shows up in that. And you can see here, my body is blocking it. 1 second. I'll move over here for the moment. So reactive shield, you can see here is as a reaction when an enemy hits you, you can raise shield and gain your bonus AC to the attack, possibly making the attack miss. So overall, a really good general feat to pick up on your way. And as I mentioned before, there's a lot of shield-based feats here in Lastwall Sentry. So if you're not a shield-wielding character, I wouldn't say it's not a good archetype, but it definitely benefits a lot of shield-based, behavior. Something else I'll mention with the Lastwall Sentry dedication is the next 2 archetypes that we'll be doing on the channel, the Reclaimant and the Vigilant, the Vigilant. Those archetypes also take from the same pool from the Lastwall Sentry dedication. So, that being the case, you can select those archetype feats in addition to these without needing to pick up the total 3 feats necessary, which is really good. So, our first feat in the list here is always ready, and it's actually a really good one as well. So, essentially what it means is you can no longer be caught off guard by hidden or even undetected undead, or even flanking, though those flanking undead can provide off guard for non-undead allies. So, for their allies, rather. So if you are fighting undead, you pretty much can't be caught off guard, which is really good something that's very standard. You see flat-footed here. It's going to become off guard in the remaster, which is why I'm using the terminology. So really solid. Also, you get a +1 circumstance bonus if all enemies that you're fighting in an encounter are undead. Now, this is a kind of a somewhat tedious one because if some are hidden, or if there are non-undead enemies, you don't get the bonus, which feels very kind of silly. It is what it is. I think what I would prefer they had done with this is that any undead in the encounter against you get a -1 circumstance penalty to their initiative. That way, it only affects undead and it can be applied in most situations. And that might be a homebrew that I would personally probably use with this one, just because it makes it easier. And even if it's a mixed group, at least the undead are less reactive towards your group, as I'm sure you've told your friends everything about undead at this point, as that's all the Lastwall Sentries do is just talk about undead 24/7. That's just their thing, right? So, always ready, a very, very solid feat that gives you all kinds of really good benefits. Speaking of shield feats, Blessed Shield is going to be the first shield feat we come across here on the list, and it's overall really good. So essentially what it is anytime you have a shield boss or shield spike that you utilize in combat, it gains the effects of the Ghost Touch property rune when you use this singular action. Additionally, any damage you take as a result of an incorporeal creature's strike can trigger your shield block reaction even though their damage is not technically physical. So, more or less, it's a decent action that pretty much gives you, until the beginning of your next turn, a benefit. I really wish this one allowed you to raise shield in addition, because this is a lot of benefits that, I mean, unless you're planning on just straight out duking it out with a ghost using your shield, this is kind of a silly action to take, to be honest. So if they made this Blessed Shield action raise shield in addition, I would say it was really good. Otherwise, it's actually kind of garbage in my opinion. As a GM, I'd probably allow it to raise shield just to give this action actually use, because you're not likely to be duking it out with a ghost with your shield boss unless that's your only option, which feels kind of silly. And the shield block reaction means that you would not only need to bless your shield, but then raise your shield, spending 2 actions on shield-based activities, giving you 1 action to either move or strike or something, which is really just a lot. Honestly, I'd like to like the Blessed Shield more, but right now, just action economy wise, it's a bit silly, and it only lasts until the end of your next turn. Heck, I'd even make Blessed Shield last for a minute so that they only have to do it once. That makes a lot more sense to me than being an action that lasts a round. So, Blessed Shield, good features, bad action economy efficiency. So, it is what it is. All right, next is Eye of Azem. This is actually a very solid one. Another level 4 feat that we can select here. You get a +2 circumstance bonus to initiative rolls when using perception. So this is just always a bonus. But because this one is also circumstance, as we can see here, we go back to Always Ready. It actually overrides the bonus you would have always gotten from Always Ready. Granted, Always Ready applies to non-perception based initiatives, while this one applies to perception based initiatives. In any regard, I don't like it just because the circumstance bonus just kind of overrides Always Ready. Again, if you made Always Ready reduce enemy undead initiative, I think then these two work really well together. So just, a homebrew that I feel just adds a lot more validity to some of your choices, especially if someone's going hard down the Lastwall Sentry line. Regardless, also when you're scouting, you grant your allies a +2 circumstance bonus instead of 1, making the Lastwall Sentry as good as a scout, which is very interesting. And it's not undead specific, so this can apply in a lot of situations. Eye of Azem is actually just a really good standard feat that can apply to a lot of campaigns, not just undead-based ones. Another very interesting feat. You can also see, excuse me, you can also see here that there's a lot of feats here in this list. And that's because not only was the World Guide providing the Lastwall Sentry, but the Knights of Lastwall book that came out also added a bunch of feats. So you can thank the book for making the Knights of Lastwall probably one of the deepest feat lines that you can access in the game. And there's 2 other archetypes, sub-archetypes, that tie into this one, which is absolutely nuts. But Familiar Foe is actually a really good one, and I want to see more feats like this in the game. Because what it does is, if you're facing off against undead, you get a +1 circumstance bonus to recall knowledge checks. And whenever you recall knowledge is a critical failure, you get a failure instead. I like this because it's very specific, and you already get undead lore through the dedication, making you just overall better at identifying undead, which makes a lot of sense for the archetype. There's a lot of... I wish the Ranger got something similar-ish to this in the way. They get some things that are similar. They get bonuses to recall knowledge against their favorite foes, but they don't get, like, the crit failure thing, and they don't, like, get an innate lore based on... Like, Rangers should just get an innate lore on their favorite enemy for if they select that feat line. I just think that should be a thing. But yeah, so you do need to be an expert in religion, and I forgot to mention before for the last feat, you didn't need to be an expert in perception. So you do need to be an expert in religion, but if you're focusing on fighting undead, well, then this is going to be the feat line for you anyway. And we're getting halfway through the video, so I just wanted to remind you that if you're enjoying this kind of content, please subscribe to see more videos like this in the future as well. There's not another channel that does as many archetype videos as I do on the platform. So if you want in-depth rules on anything Pathfinder related, but especially archetypes, then you're going to want to be a part of this channel, I promise. Anyway, the next feat we're looking at is Final Rest. This is a very interesting one, but one that is not going to be relevant to your character because it only applies after they die. So essentially, you can't be transformed into an undead, except by means that originate from an artifact or a deity. Undead creatures that touch your corpse takes a positive damage, which will be, I think, vitality, each time they do, or a d6 vitality damage each time they expose themselves to your corpse in a more thorough manner, such as carrying you, biting you, or the like. Final Rest is fun, and it is a skill feat, which I will mention, which kind of lessens the blow a little bit. You can pick it up if you don't have any other skills that you're very interested in, but this is a feat that overall only works when you're dead. So, yeah, but it also makes it more likely for your allies to be able to bring you back, because if you're undead, that becomes a lot harder. So, Final Rest, interesting. It's a skill feat, so I can't really be upset about it. But again, only applies when you're dead. All right, the next feat is going to be an interesting one, especially because the remaster is going to affect this one in some ways. So Necromantic Resistance is going to become Void Resistance, first of all. So that's something to keep in mind. You do get a +1 circumstance bonus to saves against effects that have the Void trait. Now, it also says necromancy effects. Now, they're removing whole spell schools, right? So, unless necromancy is also another type of effect, this is going to be very weird, honestly, going forward. Now, of course, you can always just look at the old rules, and most of the time you'll be able to make this work, but new spells that are coming out will make this more difficult, so... I don't know. I think it has some easy workarounds, but it is going to be somewhat confusing. You also gain Void Resistance equal to half your level, which is actually pretty huge, and this feat actually goes into a much later feat, so it's something that I would recommend looking into, because Void Resistance, again, Void damage is going to be a very common type of damage that you're going to come across. Any kind of undead creatures or any kind of death-based creatures are going to be doing void damage. So Necromantic Resistance is going to have a lot of benefits to you regardless of kind of the jank around it. Though, you know, it's just one of those things that I would keep this particular feat in mind based on the type of campaign you are, because Resistance is always just very good. Nonlethal Takedown. This is a very interesting one and kind of a fluff feat that they added on. I mean, it makes sense when you consider the lore, but it's just something that is so just extra, you know. It's so it wasn't necessary that this feat needed to be added to the Knights of Lastwall, But here it is. So the Lastwall Sentry gets access to Nonlethal Takedown, and essentially what it does is you don't take the normal -2 circumstance penalty when making non-lethal attacks with weapons without the non-lethal trait. This allows you to spare the living more easily. I mean, I can see a lot of characters wanting to take this one if they do just not want to kill people needlessly. But you would have to go all the way into the Knights of Lastwall dedication to select this one, which I find is a little silly. So I wish this was like a general feat you could select or something rather than being tied to the Knights of Lastwall specifically. Or I should say the Lastwall Sentry specifically. So yeah, interesting feat. Really good if you're playing a very good character who wants to kill the undead but spare the living no matter how sinful, because you got bigger problems to worry about, and killing people oftentimes just makes more undead. So I like it, but I just wish this was more of a general feat rather than being specific to Lastwall Sentry. All right, Rescuer's Press. This is a rare feat. I don't know why, because it's because it's from the Legends book. It's probably something you get from or Calabrine, or what was the other one's name? Clarith. So either one of them, it might be like a specific feat they teach. But what it does is any shield you wield gains the shove trait, which means it applies. Or, well, yeah, actually, I guess if you have a shield boss, would it? Yeah, if you had a shield boss that has an item bonus to attacks, you could apply that to the shove bonus. It also lets you shove with a shield without needing to have a hand free. Though I think that's just a thing that most people do anyway. It doesn't make sense not to. So I don't know. Anyway, when you shove using a shield and stride as part of the action, you can move an additional feat to either side of the creature you shoved. In addition, if you are in Everstand stance, which is a stance that you can select from it should show here. Oh, it's something that you can pick up from the Bastion archetype while needing to be a member of the Knights of Lastwall, which is very interesting. And successfully shove a creature using your shield that you wield two-handed, you can increase the distance of your shove by 10 feet, which is a pretty sizable difference. You can knock some people really far off. Rescuer's Press is really good. This feat is just kind of weird that it's here in Lastwall Sentry rather than Bastion, for instance, because it works best with the Everstand stance. But I don't know. It's a messy feat, honestly. I like its features. I think it's cool. I just you need to select another whole archetype just to get access to all the features of this one feat, which seems a little weird if you ask me. But or even worse, you actually have Everstand stance, but then you need to go into Lastwall Sentry in order to pick up this feat. I don't know. Again, interesting feat, just very kind of messy. All right, next up is Grave Sense. Grave Sense is okay. So it's not an imprecise sense, but you can turn it into an imprecise sense later. You just kind of get the vague sense that an undead is near you, more or less. So whenever they're in your general proximity, you get a hint that undead are nearby. Now, if the undead is specifically trying to disguise itself to look otherwise not like an undead, it must make a deception check against your perception DC to hide its presence from you. If the creature succeeds its deception check, it's temporarily immune to your grave sense for a day. So the thing about that implication, right, is if it's an important NPC, they're going to be designed to beat your deception or to beat your perception DC easily, because them being found out earlier might ruin the story. So that particular part is a very vague niche situation when a lesser unimportant undead is disguised as a non-undead, which I mean can happen. It's just very niche. The vague sense of undead is interesting, and you can get an imprecise scent later that makes this even better. But this feat in itself is not going to be super handy. You're going to want to take Grave Sense to upgrade it later. So that's my opinion. It's not bad, but it's just kind of like a half step to what you actually want, which makes it a little bit worse than like a normal feat. All right, Practice Opposition, a 6th level feat. I keep forgetting to mention the levels. This is an action, and when you attempt a recall knowledge check on an undead, you can see, then strike that undead. If the recall knowledge was a success, you treat your strikes you treat the target's resistance to the strike as 5 lower. The target is then immune to your practice opposition for 24 hours. So this is interesting because at the moment, unless it's a spirit or some kind of wraith undead, which get a bunch of resistances to damage, unless you're using Ghost Strike or Ghost Touch, in which case the resistances wouldn't apply. I don't know. This one's very interesting. I can only see it really being used if you're just not fully prepared for handling a certain type of undead. There might be some undead that have like a physical resistance or something. I don't know. This is an interesting feat. I do like the fact that this actually is a good feat in the sense that it's a singular action that lets you recall knowledge and strike with a single action, which is really good, and it doesn't even have the flourish trait. So technically, unless you're using a specific trait, every time you strike the enemy, I guess not because they become immune to your practice opposition for 24 hours. So yeah, I guess you can't. It's okay. It's an okay feat. I like the fact that you can strike and recall knowledge on an enemy. And so if there are multiple undead, you can do multiple recall knowledges on them. Granted, each successive recall knowledge will make further recall knowledges harder. But still, I do like the action efficiency with it. Even if it's just once, it's still pretty good as like a type of strike. So yeah, practice opposition, pretty good unless you're a fighter who gets they get that one strike that allows them to recall knowledge as a part of a strike. But this is a good version if you're not a fighter. All right, I don't know if this one's a typo because it says Repulse the Wiccan, but I think it means the Wicked. This is a 6th level feat and it's a reaction, and it occurs when an undead within your reach critically fails a strike against you. So when they do so, you can shove the undead. I don't know if that's going to be worth your reaction. It might be. The good thing about this particular action is it's very solid for actually protecting you, because a lot of like zombies are slow. So they run up to you and then you can shove them, and then they pretty much can't get to you that turn. And even if they weren't a normal undead, they would move up to you, attack you, you would shove them back, and then their last action would have to be a step or a stride to get back into your range. So Repulse the Wiccan, which I still think it should be Wicked, is an interesting feat. And I think it has a lot of good implications for defensive purposes. But that's mostly where it ends. Is it is a feat that's only really good if, one, you have good athletics, and two, you don't have a reaction that's probably better off for like damaging the enemy, or you're just trying to defend yourself. Pushing during a reaction, though, is very good because, as I mentioned before, it can actually just burn enemies' actions during their turn, which is really, really good. So Repulse the Wiccan, it's a pretty okay feat. Sacred Armaments. This is a really good one. Weapons you wield have the effects of the Ghost Touch property rune for as long as you wield them. Very simple, very sweet. Technically works on shield bosses as well, maybe? I think so, because I think shield bosses count as a weapon. I had this argument before. I don't remember. But this works really well and technically works even better than Blessed Shield does, other than you can't get the benefits of shield block against ethereal creatures with it. But yeah, Sacred Armament is very solid, and again, it makes some of the other feats a little janky in my opinion. So I don't know, but I like it. It's a good feat. Getting the effects. It doesn't even say you get Ghost Touch on your weapon, which would suppress another rune if your weapon was full on property runes. This just says you get the effects of Ghost Touch, which is very, very good. All right, Flashing Shield. This is a level 8 feat, and it's a free action. It's really good. Now, the trigger is you use shield block reaction, and the opponent that triggered the reaction is an undead and adjacent to you. So, essentially, what happens is when you shield block the enemy takes positive damage equal to half your level and becomes off guard for 1 round, which is very, very solid. If you're using a shield a lot and you're using your shield block reaction to mitigate a bunch of damage. This is a good way to not only inflict positive damage, which a lot of like zombies and other types of undead just have a weakness to, but also they just become they become off guard, not flat-footed. Same thing, but remaster. Off guard for you for a round, which means until their next turn, essentially. So yeah, Flashing Shield is pretty good. All right, next up is Necromantic Bulwark, another level 8 feat. And essentially what it is when you're raising a shield, which again would be really, really good if Blessed Shield let you raise your shield, you gain your shield circumstance bonus to your AC, essentially, to bonus to saving throw effects against those that would deal void damage, because negative is being changed to void. And also if you shield block, or if you have the shield block reaction, you can use on void damage you take, even though it's not considered physical. This is actually really, really good, and even better than Blessed Shield. Would work better with Blessed Shield. A Blessed Shield let you raise your shield, as that not only would Blessed Shield allow you to be able to block ghosts and incorporeal attacks, but also void-based attacks, specifically like spells, which void in general, this applies to more than just undead. So you can use this effect in a lot of different ways. So I actually really like Necromantic Bulwark. I think it's a really good feat. And unlike Blessed Shield, this one just applies whenever you're using your shield normally. So it doesn't have extra action economy to get essentially the same kind of benefits. Overall, Necromantic Bulwark is really, really good. All right, next up is Necromantic Tenacity, and this is a pretty okay one, but again, this one is one of those feats that's going to suffer due to the changing of how spells work. Since there won't be a necromancy school of spells anymore, this applies to effects that you would consider to be necromantic, I guess. That one of my gripes with the remaster is the removing of whole schools, because feats like this become very vague and hard to make rules for. It just like, does this seem necromantic? I don't know. Yeah, then it works. No, then it doesn't work. But anyway, as intended, if you're up against a necromantic effects, if you roll a success on the saving throw, you get a critical success instead. And if you will get a critical failure, you get a failure instead. What was a really good feat now becomes very confusing. It's still a good feat, but how it's applied is something that is questionable. You also need Necromantic Resistance to select this one, which again, Necromantic Resistance is good because it gives you void resistance. So this is a good pickup if you had picked up Necromantic Resistance. Gravesight. This is the one that you needed Grave Sense for, and makes Grave Sense actually work good. So you get an imprecise sense for undead within 60 feet, as you get an uncomfortable sensation, chills, or the like. The undead to you is hidden rather than observed, but it still works really well. Even if it's hidden, you know the square or squares that it's in, which is very, very good. And if the undead is trying to hide from you, they must make a deception against your perception DC, and if they succeed, it's undetected, and you have to use the seek basic action to detect the creature, as with hearing and other imprecise senses. You still need to seek to locate undetected creatures. So yeah, this is really good. I don't know if the implication is that they become undetected to you, then you still know that there's an undead in your presence, and you can use a seek to find it. The undead, because they're considered hidden, can, if they succeed a stealth check, become undetected to you. So yeah, I like this one. I think there's a lot of interesting implications for it. There are also just a lot of really sneaky undead creatures that become invisible or can be hard to find, very good at stealth and the like. So Gravesight, I think, is really good. It just kind of sucks that you had to select Grave Sense first, as Grave Sense, I feel, is much less usable in a lot of situations. But oh well, this is also a level 10 feat, so you're pretty far on your journey at this point, and you're going to start coming across more undead that this is going to be useful against when this comes up. So it's good if you already have Grave Sense. All right, Lastwall Warden. That's almost a ton. Lastwall Warden. Lastwall Warden. I guess not. It feels like it should be. Anyway, so when you have your shield raised, you can use shield block as a reaction. When an attack is made against an ally adjacent to you, you can block them with it instead. This does if you do, the shield prevents the ally from taking damage instead of you, following the normal rules for shield block. So reduces by hardness, then both the shield and your ally would take the remaining damage. Now, if the undead is or if the target that's attacking your ally is undead, you can actually step to your ally if that would put you adjacent to them and use your shield block as a part of the same reaction, which is really good. So this is a really good general feat that can apply in a lot of situations as long as you maintain adjacency to your ally. And then if it's an undead, you can at least be a step away so you can step in and use the shield block reaction. I like it. I think this is a really good action overall. And plus, in general, it just allows you to use shield block to defend your allies, undead or not. So a very, very good feat in general. One, again, that I think you can get something similar in Bastion for. But if you're going through Lastwall Warden, now you have your own version of it here. And it has additional benefits against undead, which is really cool. All right, a level 12 feat here, and boy, howdy, there's a lot of feats in this. This probably has the most feats of any archetype dedication, and there's 2 sub-archetypes that you can take in addition to this, so nutty. But yeah, so No Stranger to Death, this is a pretty good one. You gain a +2 circumstance bonus to saving throws against spells that have the death, disease, and evil traits, which evil is going to be turned to unholy, so unholy trait, which means it works against a lot of fiends, which is pretty cool. And whenever you become drained or sickened, reduce the status penalty you take from those conditions by 1 to a minimum of 0. And it isn't contingent. I mean, the fluff text isn't relevant to the actual effects. So, yeah, it doesn't say specifically. So, anytime you just become drained or sickened, you just reduce it. The sickened, wow, that's actually really good. Being able to just negate sickened 1 is solid. That's so good whenever you become reduced to condition by 1 to a minimum of 0. Yeah, it's Putrance of Unentered you to its effects. Yeah, it's not specific. It's not even specific to spells. It's just whenever you become drained or sickened. That's really good. No Stranger to Death is actually a very killer archetype. For a level 12 archetype 2, that's really good. I just, wow. Being resistant to, or being immune to essentially sickened 1 is very, very good. Yeah, that's a very good feat. That's a very, very good feat. All right, we're quick approaching the end here. We got 3 more feats. So, Resolute Defender, a very good feat, level 14. So when you hold your shield, if your shield would be destroyed by any kind of damage when you use shield block, it remains intact with 1 HP. Its construction is weakened, so you can no longer use Resolute Defender again until your next daily preparations. But yeah, it essentially allows you to get an additional use out of your shield block before your shield is destroyed. Very good, very solid, a very good shield-based archetype. And again, good if you're not going down Bastion already, because I think Bastion has a similar feat, but good if your whole focus is being a Knight of Lastwall. That's a very solid feat. I really like that one, and it just gets extra efficiency out of shields, which is very good. All right, Thw Evil. Had to go to another screen so you guys could see it more easily as my face was blocking it. So Thw Evil is a reaction that you can use once per day. It's a level 14 feat, and a creature that you see uses a spell or ability that has the Unholy or Void traits. Wow, a double whammy on the remastered on this one. So you react instinctively to the attempt. You can attempt to use your religion to counteract it using your religion modifier as the counteract modifier. A once per day reaction that's essentially a counterspell against a spell that has the Unholy or Void trait is very good, honestly. It's a very good one, and not only that, but because it's not using your spell modifier, but instead your religion one, you'll actually get access to a legendary counteract modifier, essentially, sooner than you would as a spellcaster would normally. Even though it's once per day and it uses your reaction, I think this overall, Thw Evil, is an insanely good reaction and a good feat in general to have. And there's some campaigns this is going to make absolute havoc for. So as a level 14 feat, this is really good. Now, you do need to be expert in religion to at least get this, but we're probably already an expert at this point since some of the other feats required expert religion. So overall, a very solid feat. All right, and the last feat for the Lastwall Sentry, and then we'll get into the Vigilant and the Reclaimant and other videos. But this one does require that you have Necromantic Resistance. This is also a level 16 feats, and Withstand Death is actually very, very good because what it does is your resistance to void damage also applies to damage dealt by attacks and abilities of an undead creature, regardless of the type. So, not only do you get solid void resistance from Necromantic Resistance, but if it's just an undead in general, no matter what the type of damage is, you just get resistance equal to half your level, which means even spells they use, even if it uses fire or the like, as long as an undead creature is the one making the damage, you gain resistance to it, giving you resistance to a whole species of enemy, which is very, very good. A whole subtype of enemy, whole trait. That's very powerful, actually. This comes in handy a lot. And even though it's half your level resistance, it's still insanely good. Now, the strange part about this, and something that I feel like was not properly written into this text here, it says your resistance to negative damage, or void in this case, also applies to damage. So does that mean if you gain an item that just gives you more void resistance, that does the same thing? I think it should say specifically here, the void resistance you get from Necromantic Resistance also applies to undead creatures. That is my assumed version of it, but I'm sure there's some cheesy people out there that say, well, it just says my void resistance, so I just have this amulet that gives me 20 void resistance, and I have 20 resistance to all undead attacks, which would be very, very insanely powerful. So something to keep in mind. But with that, that's it for the Lastwall Sentry. Overall, a very good dedication, a very long archetype dedication, scrolling through the screen here. It's got a lot, and what I really like about this is it has a lot of theme to it that is very practical for use. And on top of that, it has a lot of good feats to select if you're just a shield using character, making the Lastwall Sentry overall just a very fun archetype to use, because even if you're not fighting undead specifically, there's a lot of good knightly style, like there's a lot of good at night based archetypes here if you want to play a knightly character. So I like that benefit to it, and I think this is just overall a very good archetype. I mean, it's gotta be, right? It's got like 1,000,000 feats. So yeah. Anyway, that's gonna be it for this video. This video is very long. Not my fault, but they made a whole book that added 1,000,000,000 feats to this particular dedication. So, but now y'all know. Now y'all have the secrets of the Knights of Lastwall. That's gonna be it for me. Thank y'all so much for watching. Good luck with your games. Leave the bad luck to me, and I'll see y'all next time. Bye.